The air in room 307 wasn't just cold, it was final. It smelled of antiseptic and unanswered prayers. Ethan Cross had already made peace with the silence. The doctors, with their charts and their soft, pitying voices, had given him weeks, maybe less. The man who had built skyscrapers, whose hands had once commanded steel and concrete, was now reduced to counting the cracks in the ceiling, waiting for the end. He'd said his goodbyes. His ex-wife had cried. His son had tried to be brave. It was over. He spent his last reserves of energy watching the world from his window. A world that was moving on without him. Kids playing catch in the park across the street. People rushing to jobs he would never return to. Life, in all its beautiful, cruel indifference, was happening just beyond the glass. Then the impossible happened. It wasn't a dramatic heavenly light, it was a slow, stubborn stabilization. His lab numbers, once a hopelessly declining graph, plateaued. Then they began a hesitant, miraculous climb. Dr. Reyes, a woman who had seen everything in her 30-year career, was left speechless. She called it medically inexplicable, a spontaneous regression, a miracle. Ethan felt no joy, only a profound and terrifying confusion. Why him? What was the point of this reprieve? Guilt gnawed at him. He had been prepared to cross the finish line, and now he was being pushed back onto the track with no map. The peace he had found in acceptance was replaced by a restless, urgent need for purpose. This second chance couldn't be for nothing. It was in this state of turbulent rebirth that he first truly heard the sounds from room 309. He'd been aware of the comings and goings, the hushed, frantic conversations, the steady beep of a ventilator, the soft, broken sobs of a woman, but he'd been too wrapped in his own dying to pay attention. Now, alive, he listened. The cries belonged to Maria. The patient was her son, Lucas, a 28-year-old musician. A car accident, a traumatic brain injury. The prognosis was grim. The word irreversible was used. The family, Maria, and Lucas's fiancée, Chloe, were clinging to hope by a thread that was rapidly fraying. One evening, Ethan overheard a conversation he wasn't meant to hear. Dr. Reyes was speaking to a specialist in the hall, her voice low but the strain evident. "We've run every test. There's no higher brain activity. The family is talking about a benefit concert to cover the long-term care facility. They're planning for a life that might not be there. It's a beautiful, heartbreaking delusion." Ethan's own heart hammered against his ribs. A delusion, a long-term facility, a life spent in a room like this, but without the privilege of being aware of it. He knew that emptiness. He had stared into it, and in that moment his purpose crystallized with terrifying clarity. He couldn't let that happen. His miracle wasn't just for him. It was a down payment on someone else's. The next day he asked a nurse to send Maria in. She entered, her eyes red raw, her posture defeated. She expected condolences. "Don't give up on him," Ethan said, his voice still rough from disuse. Maria looked at him, startled. "We're not. We have faith." "Good. Faith is a start. But he needs more than faith. He needs to hear it." Ethan began his campaign. It was a quiet, relentless mission of hope. He convinced Maria and Chloe that even if Lucas couldn't respond, he could hear them. He urged them to talk to him, not about the accident, not about the pain, but about life, about the stupid, beautiful, mundane things. "Tell him about the dog wanting a walk," Ethan would say. "Tell him the coffee at the cafeteria is still terrible. Tell him Chloe's new haircut. Fill his silence with your noise." He noticed things. A well-worn guitar case in the corner of Lucas's room, a sticker from a local indie band peeling off its side, a songbird tattoo on Chloe's wrist, puzzle pieces. He started weaving these pieces into his suggestions. "Chloe, play him that song you both loved at that concert in the park. The one with the lyrics about the stubborn oak tree. Maria, remember that time he tried to bake a cake and use salt instead of sugar? Tell him that story. Laugh about it. Make him feel the memory." He became an unlikely guardian angel stationed in the room next door. He'd hear Chloe's voice, shaky at first, then growing stronger, singing a soft folk song. He'd hear Maria's laughter, real and unexpected, as she recounted a childhood mischief. They were building a bridge of sound and memory into Lucas's silence, but not everyone saw it as hope. Dr. Evans, a younger, fiercely pragmatic neurologist, saw it as interference. He pulled Ethan aside one day, his tone professionally stern. "Mr. Cross, what you're doing, I understand the sentiment, but you're inflating expectations beyond what is medically possible. You're setting that family up for a catastrophic fall. This isn't a movie, this is real life, with real, tragic consequences." The words were a bucket of ice water. Was he? Was this just a selfish attempt to give his own survival meaning at the expense of a grieving family's final peace? The doubt was a poison. For 2 days he retreated, the old emptiness calling him back. It was Chloe who sought him out. She stood in his doorway, not crying, but with a fierce, determined light in her eyes. "They're talking about moving him next week, to a place for people who don't come back. We can't let that happen. You can't stop now. We need you." Her words were the final piece of his own healing. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about them. It was about Lucas. The night before the transfer was scheduled, Lucas's vitals crashed, alarms blared, a code blew. Room 309 flooded with medical personnel. Maria and Chloe were ushered out, their faces masks of pure horror. This was it, the catastrophic fall Dr. Evans had predicted. Ethan watched from his door, his own miracle feeling like a cruel joke. He saw the defeat on Dr. Reyes's face as she worked. He saw the slow, shaking head of Dr. Evans. They were stopping, they were calling it. And in that absolute silence, after the machines were turned off, something snapped inside Ethan. He walked into the room, past the stunned doctors, and went straight to Lucas's bedside. He ignored everyone. He leaned down, his mouth close to Lucas's ear. His voice was low, a raw, urgent whisper, not of medical advice, but of a shared, stolen secret. "Lucas," he whispered, "they're stopping. They're giving up, but I didn't. Your mother didn't. Chloe never did. She's wearing that stupid band t-shirt you bought her at the Riverside concert, the one with the fox on it. She's been playing your guitar every night trying to get your favorite song right. She needs you to come back and show her the right chord, the one you always said was the heart of the song." The heart of the song, Lucas. Don't you dare leave her to play it alone. Fight. He didn't pray. He didn't beg. He just stated facts. He poured every puzzle piece, the guitar, the song, the tattoo, the concert, the salt in the cake, into that one final, desperate command. It was the sum total of all his listening, all his hope, all his purpose. He stepped back. The room was frozen. Dr. Evans was about to speak to usher him out. And then it happened. A sound, not from a machine, a low, guttural, almost inhuman rasp, a breath. Lucas's finger twitched. Then a single, tremulous tear escaped the corner of his eye and traced a path down his temple. The wow moment wasn't a dramatic sitting up in bed. It was that tear. It was the sharp, shocked intake of breath from Dr. Reyes. It was the monitor, which had not been turned back on, suddenly flickering as a nurse fumbled to reconnect it, showing a heart rate that was strengthening, stabilizing. It was the sound of a miracle, not given, but fought for. Lucas didn't wake up that day, but the irreversible had been reversed. The hopeless case had found a sliver of hope. The journey was long, but it was a journey now. He was transferred not to a long-term facility, but to an intensive neuro-rehabilitation unit. Weeks later, Ethan stood outside the hospital, the sun warming his face for the first time as a free man. He was thin, older, but his eyes held a light that hadn't been there before he got sick. Maria and Chloe found him there. Chloe wasn't crying. She was holding Lucas's guitar case. "He spoke a word yesterday," Chloe said, her voice thick with emotion. "It was Fox." She smiled, a real radiant, world-changing smile. The stupid t-shirt. Maria hugged Ethan, a long, wordless embrace that said everything. When she pulled away, she pressed something into his hand. It was a single, worn guitar pick Lucas had always used. On it was written the name of his band, Second Chance. Ethan closed his fingers around it. It wasn't a medal, it was a compass. He looked back at the massive hospital, a place of endings and just maybe beginnings. He knew what his second chance was for. His work wasn't finished, it had only just begun. He turned, squared his shoulders to the sun, and started to walk. He had a promise to keep. Not just to Lucas, but to the next person and the next, waiting in the quiet rooms for a reason to fight.